Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Monday, January 8th. Today is day 94 since October 7th and the attacks by Hamas in South Israel. Save the Children came out with a report on the devastating impact of the war on Gaza upon children. In addition to the thousands and thousands of children killed in the bombing campaign, in the ground incursion in Gaza, more than 10 children every day on average have lost one or both of their legs in Gaza since the conflict began 3 months ago. And this is just one small statistic that highlights that we can't even begin to comprehend what life has been like in Gaza since October 7th. Reports from hostages that have been released say that one of the things that they feared the most was actually the bombing campaigns. And when I'm in touch with people in Gaza, they talk about the trauma of just what it's like to fear when you go to bed every night, not knowing if you're going to wake up in the morning. And when we hear the statistic that 10 children every day have lost one or both of their legs, it's hard for us to even comprehend what that means. But I think that that gives us a horrific image of the devastating effects of the bombing campaign on Gaza. I hope it motivates us and compels us to continue to call for a ceasefire and to an end to violence and to alternative diplomatic solutions and a negotiated settlement as a way forward. The World Health Organization also canceled a delivery of medical supplies to northern Gaza because of security fears. They warned that a key hospital in central Gaza must remain functional as workers flee fighting. More than 23,000 people have been killed in Gaza since the war began, according to the World Health Organization, and more than 57,000 people have been injured. News from Israel, Ben-Gvir said that the so-called voluntary immigration of Palestinians from Gaza is the correct solution, that Israelis should resettle the Strip. So we've been talking in the past several days about what's going to happen in Gaza after all of this is over. And some Israeli government officials are saying, absolutely not, that Israelis are not going to populate the Strip. And here Ben-Gvir is saying that that is the correct solution. There have been protests in Tel Aviv. One of them was calling for Netanyahu's removal. The government didn't just hand over suitcases of money to Hamas. It sold us along the way. The residents of the Gaza border communities, said one of the speakers at the Reality. It gave up on us and their lie blew up in our faces on October 7th, was what one of the speakers said. Others rallies have had highlighting the release or the call for the release of the 100 remaining hostages in Gaza. They included testimonies of hostages that have already been freed, who were screened, and also showing support for family members of hostages who are still held there. Romy Cohen has a twin brother who was kidnapped, and he said, "I fear that people will start to forget about them. Don't leave us. Time is running out." And so I just would remind you that Churches for Middle East Peace is calling for the release of the hostages who continue to be held in Gaza, and also in exchange and calling for the release of Palestinian prisoners who are held without charges on administrative detention or who are held without due process. Families of Israelis who were killed in a Be'eri home that was hit by an Israeli Defense Forces tank on October 7th have demanded a probe. The investigation of the event, this happened on October 7th. Israelis were held by Hamas inside of a house, and they were killed when there was an exchange of fire with Israeli Defense Forces tanks. And these families are calling for an investigation now and not after the war. In a New York Times investigation, a Brigadier General Barak Haram said that he had ordered the tank commander to fire on the home of Kibbutz Be'eri resident Pezi Cohen, in which Israeli civilians and many terrorists were holed up. This is directly quoting, even at the cost of civilian casualties. 14 civilians were in the home, in addition to Hamas fighters. Secretary Blinken is now on his tour of the Middle East, and his diplomacy there has continued. He was in Saudi Arabia today, and he heads to Israel soon. NBC reported that he has been warned repeatedly by Middle Eastern leaders on his tour that anti-United States opinion is growing in the region over U.S. support of Israel. Multiple senior officials, diplomatic sources, and congressional officials communicated this to NBC News. The State Department put out a press release stating that the objectives of Blinken's trip are first, that Israel and Israelis should be able to live in peace and security, free from terrorist attacks or aggression from any neighbors. Second, that the West Bank and Gaza should be united under Palestinian-led governance. And third, that the future of the region needs to be one of integration, not of division and not of conflict. And fourth, for that to happen, we need the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. Statements, this is my interpretation. I read several of the statements from the State Department about Blinken, the readouts of his meetings with high-level diplomats in different countries. And I thought that there was a lot of diplomatic speak. You know, he said countries will do what it takes. There was a question that Blinken was asked about the Saudi normalization agreement and if that deal was still going to move forward. And if this might be an opportunity to leverage, perhaps, that the normalization would only go forward if issues with Palestinians are addressed, ending the occupation, ending the war on Gaza. And Blinken's response said, there's a clear interest here in pursuing that. There's a clear interest in the region in pursuing that. But it will require that the conflict end in Gaza, and it will also require that there be a practical pathway to a Palestinian state. Qatar's prime minister said that the killing last week of the senior Hamas official in Beirut, Salah al-Aruri, made hostage release negotiations difficult, but talks are ongoing. Blinken also had meetings in Qatar after meeting with Jordan's King Abdullah of Amman, who warned that there will be catastrophic repercussions if the fighting in Gaza continues. And Blinken stressed, quote, U.S. opposition to forcible displacement of Palestinians, end quote, as well as the need to protect West Bank Palestinians from settler violence. King Abdullah warned Blinken of catastrophic repercussions if the war does not end. U.S. officials do fear that Netanyahu, I mentioned this, will try to expand the fighting against Hezbollah in Lebanon for the sake of political survival. That was reported by the Washington Post. It was also reported that a new U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency assessment suggests that the IDF would be hard-pressed to win a large-scale war against Hezbollah. In that regard, an elite Hezbollah commander was killed in South Lebanon today, the Iran-backed militant group said in a statement, which indicates perhaps fear of growing escalation. Last week's assassination of Hamas leader in Beirut halted talks on the hostage deal, as I mentioned. And so now there are, increased senior officials being killed, which there's always concerns of retaliation and repercussions. In world news this week, the International Court of Justice is set to begin their hearings about South Africa's charges against Israel. Israel appointed their former Supreme Court President Aaron Barak to represent Israel at the International Court of Justice against charges of genocide. And the Chinese shipping firm Costco has suspended shipping to Israel without offering a reason. Israeli financial news website Globes reported on Sunday. The report comes as Yemen's Houthis have been disrupting shipping lanes in the Red Sea. Do take a look, please, at our website. We now have information up about activities on the Global Day of Action on January 13th. We plan on also streaming a service from Jerusalem on the 14th. And so take a look at the activities coming up, Churches for Middle East Peace. And so we continue to call for a ceasefire and to an end to violence and war.